Today's gospel passage is one of those highly symbolic miracles that the church uses in a number of different ways, particularly surrounding baptism. In fact, when children are baptized, the minister goes up to each child before their baptism and puts their hand on their ear and their lips and says, Ephphatha. In RCIA for adults, as the people are preparing for baptism at Easter, there's a special ceremony called the Ephphatha rite. So this is one of those passages that is used in a lot of places, and I know it well. In fact, you could almost say I know it by heart. But each time I read it, I reflect on it, I'm struck by some simple new nuance that I didn't notice before. And this time, it was the sequence of events as the miracle unfolded. I think for most of us, if we were to not know this story and hear of a deaf mute who was commanded to be opened, we would presume that would mean it was referring to him speaking. But that is not actually the first thing that is opened. The first thing that is opened is his ears. What was opened was his ability to hear, and only then was his speech impediment removed. And if we think about it practically, this actually makes a lot of sense. Most of us have known a deaf person who was deaf from birth, and they can be trained to speak, but they have a speech pattern that we can all noticeably tell that they're deaf. And the reason is because they can't hear themselves, so their ability to correct their language the way we do through that audible feedback is not available to them. And if they could hear themselves, I'm sure that speech pattern that's very normal for deaf people to have, they wouldn't have. But of course, as with all things that Jesus teaches us, there's that surface level truth, but also I think there is a deeper meaning. And in this case, I think that meaning is that if we are going to be able to speak the truth, we first have to be open to hearing the truth. And again, at some level, this is obvious. We all know that if we haven't learned something yet, there's no way we can share that knowledge. We know learning and hearing comes before sharing. But I would argue that if we know it intellectually, we sure as heck don't know it in our own hearts. The world is full of people who love to hear themselves talk, who sure as heck do not know what they are talking about. And then we have to be careful to understand that this is so normal for all of us. It's so normal for all of us to have this desire. We desire to share what we think. And so I think the lesson of today's gospel that we really need to grapple with is that when we hear "be opened," the first thing that needs to hit our heart is that desire to be open to listening to God. We need to spend far less time talking and far more time listening. Which brings me to the point that I feel like I'm bringing up every couple months in my homily. In fact, I feel like a broken record. But I feel like at the same time, I'm really struggling to say it in a way that resonates. And in fact, I think when I look at the mirror, I'm not even sure I'm listening to myself. I repeat myself over and over, and yet I can't even follow my own advice. I think if we want to hear God, we need to find truly quiet places in our lives. Places without distractions, places without noise, places without interruptions. And we need to dedicate a significant amount of time, ideally every day, but at least every week, to going into those quiet places and spending a significant amount of time listening to God. Ideally like an hour, but at least a half hour. And I want to be very clear about what I think distracts us. It's our phones. Our phones are ruining our ability to have uninterrupted time to pray. We just do not know how to be quiet and live an uninterrupted life. There is technology in our phones that is specifically designed to wait, to not give us a notification while we're holding our phone, because they want to wait until a moment when you've put it down to get you to pick it back up again. Our phone is actively trying to get us to never forget that it's by our side. So we need to find a way to put these phones in a distant place. God wants to talk to us. He really does. But we have to want to listen. And we can only do that if we do as Christ tells us in Matthew 6. When you pray, go into your inner room and close the door. And I would say implicit in that, it means that the phone is in the outer room, somewhere where you cannot hear it. And when we do finally find that quiet place, like Samuel did in the temple, we will finally be able to hear God speak to us. And then, like Samuel, we can say with all humility, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening."